the gospel, trying to unpack why we believe that the gospel is at the center of all that we do. I know Ryan asked John a question, and I don't know if you read my blog. Do read the blogs that John mentioned on the website, because those blogs tell a lot about what we believe, how we see things. We are, in many ways, traditional, conservative, evangelical Christians in our view of the Bible. But we do see some things a little bit differently than maybe our forefathers did. And the blogs really try to bring that out. You've heard us use, or you've seen on our literature, the term 4G. We're not a 3G network, we're a 4G church. And the acronym TRIM. The 4Gs, we said, are we gather, we grow, we give, and we go. And we'll talk more about that. But last week I said that that's the outer layer, the visible layer of the church. There are things that are really more important that are the underpinnings of the 4G, and that's the trim, the values. Our values are more important than our commitments, because our values will determine how we live out those commitments. And so our values are in the acronym TRIM, to be transformational, relational, incarnational, and missional. And the intent of this pre-launch meetings is to unpack each of those so that you understand what we mean by that. But before we get there, I wanted to peel away another layer, something that is more ultimate and more important, because it is the underpinning of our values. And that's the gospel, what we believe about, how we understand the gospel and the implications of that in our life. There are all kinds of ways that churches are described. One of the most popular books today is the book, The Purpose-Driven Church. But as Michael Horton said, we want to be a gospel-driven people in a purpose-driven world. I actually agree with the purposes, though I don't want that to be what drives my life, because you'll get worn out living out the purpose-driven life. You'll get worn out, and it very easily becomes a moralistic, legalistic approach to Christianity. And you want to be deeper than that. We want to be deeper than that in our life. Some churches are, it's all about worship. I love Portland Tabernacle music. When you think of Portland Tabernacle, you think of great choir, great music. I like that, but there's something deeper that I want. And I always find myself going back to the gospel. That this is the core, this is primary. Last week I opened up Galatians chapter 1. Dawn read the first couple of verses. I'll read those verses again, and then I'm going to jump into the rest of the book of Galatians. I'm not going to unpack the whole book. I want to suggest some implications of the gospel in the book of Galatians. And hopefully when you're up and running regular worship services as a church, Galatians will be one of the first books that we study together. And when that happens, I'll not be the only one who's doing the preaching. We'll share the preaching load. But Galatians would be a good book to start with, because it is so foundational to not only Christian life, but how we see the Christian life and how we see the church. Let me again read the text that I read last week, Galatians 1, 6 through 9. I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting him who called you in the grace of Christ, and are turning to a different gospel. Not that there is another one, but there are some who trouble you and want to distort the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to the one we preach to you, let him be accursed. As we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone is preaching to you a gospel contrary to the one you received, let him be accursed. We noted last week that these believers whom Paul has led to Christ, discipled, organized into a church, have been infiltrated by those who are simply saying that the finished work of Christ on the cross is good but not enough. It opens the door, but it's not the whole picture. It's not everything. And there's stuff that you need to do, you need to add to it, to enhance your relationship with God. And Paul says, no, that's a different gospel, and being a different gospel, actually it's a non-gospel. Because if it's not a message about the finished work of Christ, and how I like to describe the gospel is that Christ lived the life that I failed to live and died the death that I deserve to die. That to me is the gospel. And the consequence of that is that I no longer have to live with the burden of trying to achieve my own righteousness before God. Nor do I have to live in fear of God's judgment. And let me tell you that much of Christianity, people are living with a burden of still trying to earn God's favor and meet up to His standards and merit, more blessing from Him. And so they're struggling. They live with the burden. The Christian life to them is not a joy. It is something that weighs them down. Others live in fear. They know that Jesus died for their sins, but somehow it's not enough. And they've made a mistake, they've sinned, they've fallen, and they live in fear that somehow God's going to smack them down for this, and that if I don't try to live the perfect life, that God's this mean father who's just looking for something to criticize in my life so he can pounce on me. Now, I don't say any of that in order to make you feel good about not trying to live for Christ or striving after holiness, trying to understand how God wants to live your life obediently. I don't diminish any of that. But if that is all there is, if that's what your focus is on doing, on performing, on striving, then you don't understand the gospel clearly. It's another gospel.